I've never read New Intelligence.
Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm delighted to have you here. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I am over the moon to welcome Guadalupe Nettel for the U.S. release of her novel, Stillborn. Guadalupe is joined tonight by writer and Green Apple's own Kathryn Haemmerle. Let's give a hand for both of them. Thank you. I appreciate you all joining us both in person and online. We are broadcasting from San Francisco. We are on Ramaytush Ohlone land, and you're welcome to sit down. Here they are. We're on Ramaytush Ohlone land, and we hope that you join us in our pledge to turn that acknowledgement into action by donating either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization every time you hear land acknowledgement. I have very brief business before I tell you a little bit about the writers who are joining us. First, now's a good time to silence your phones if you have not already. We appreciate that. Please do check out our full event calendar on our website at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind us. It is available after the event and not during the event for obvious reasons. And we usually say that it's available for attendees of our event during event time, just because it's the one place that my colleagues have that's off the sales floor that is for them. But you are also guests in our house this evening, and we want you to feel comfortable. So thank you for being cool about it. We have books available for purchase at the front of the store. You can find them there. And if you've been here before, you've definitely heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you also support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you're able, we always appreciate it. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers joining us tonight. First, Kathryn Haemmerle holds an MFA from the University of Oregon and was an MFA scholar at the Sewanee Writers Conference. Her poems have appeared in The Common, Hobart, Blackbird, Tupelo Quarterly, Radar Poetry, Nimrod, and many others. Please give a hand for Kathryn Haemmerle. And last but most certainly not least, Guadalupe Nettel is the author of 4 internationally award-winning novels: The Body Where I Was Born, After the Winter, and Stillborn, and 3 collections of short stories. Her work has been translated into more than 10 languages and has appeared in publications such as the New York Times, Granta, White Review, and many others. She currently lives in Mexico City, where she's the director of the magazine Revista de la Universidad de Mexico. And I just found out that this is her only stop in the U.S. for this tour, which is very exciting that we all get to be here this evening. So the English language edition of Stillborn was translated by Rosalind Harvey. We love translators. Thank you, translators. And it was, yay! And it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, and it is the reason we're here tonight. Let's give another hand for Guadalupe Nettel.
All right. Thank you for being here. And of course, we are very lucky to have you for the only U.S. stop. So I am honored to be here. I've been reading your work for almost 10 years now. So this is really exciting. And thank you. I figured we'd start off with you reading. I think you said you would like to do that. So should we jump right into that?
Yeah.
All right.
So hello everyone, and thanks to Green Apple Books for hosting us here tonight. Just I want to say that I'm not very comfortable speaking English, so please be patient because I'm not used to it so much.
We have in Spanish.
Yeah. Thank you, don't tempt me. Okay. So I'm going to read a part that it's not right from the beginning, but very close to it. It's chapter 2. Unlike my mother's generation, for whom it was abnormal not to have children, many women in my own age group chose to abstain. My friends, for instance, could be divided into two groups of equal size: those who consider relinquishing their freedom and sacrificing themselves for the sake of the species, and those who were prepared to accept the disgrace heaped on them by society and family as long as they could preserve their autonomy. Each one justified their position with arguments of substance. Naturally, I got along better with the second group, which included Alina. We met in our 20s, during that period which is still considered the best age to procreate in many societies, although we both felt a similar aversion to what we used to call, looking knowingly at each other, the human shackles. I was studying for a PhD in literature, and neither my student grant nor my freelance status came close to providing me with any sort of financial security. Alina had a demanding but well-paid job at an art center and was doing all she could to train at the same time in arts and cultural management. Although her income was double mine, she sent a large part of it back home to her family. Her father had been ill for several years and lived alone in a village in Veracruz, while her mother was trying to get over a recent stroke. Alina had arrived very early at that stage of life when our parents depended upon us. How would she have been able to take care of a child on top of that? In that period of my life, I was a big fan of the art of divination in all its forms, palmistry and tarot in particular. I remember that one day, after a long party whose aftermath included 2 broken glasses and a graveyard of empty bottles out on the balcony, Alina and I were alone in my apartment. We sat and listened to the footsteps of the last guest to leave echo down the Rue Vieille du Temple, utterly deserted at that early hour. I asked if she would let me read her cards. She agreed, purely to humor me, since she's always been a pragmatic woman and found the idea of receiving messages from invisible forces completely ridiculous. The tarot must have seemed like a game to her, like any other. The spread I chose that night was an ambitious one and encompassed the rest of her life. Alina cut the pack a few times, then placed it on the table in the positions I showed her. When all the cards were in place, I began turning them over slowly, partly because of how drunk I was, partly to give the moment a touch of theater. Meanwhile, the story gradually appeared, the way a photograph is revealed when we plunge it into silver nitrate. In the middle of the layout were the Empress, the 6 of Swords, Death, and the Hangman. Death, the 13th Arcana, which in many tarot decks doesn't even have a name, is a card that doesn't always mean an actual passing, but brings with it a profound radical change. Everything pointed towards a tragedy that would upset the course of her existence, perhaps even cut it short in one fell swoop. I was forced to hide my vexation. Alina must have noticed my disconcerted expression because she asked, her voice worried, what it was that I was reading. It says here that you'll be a mother and that your life will become totally cloistered. I blurted out with a playful grin. Alina shook her head vehemently and laughed, no doubt assuming I was pulling her leg, but her large black eyes stared questioningly at me, and in their depth I made out a glimmer of unease. We carried on drinking, and a couple of hours later, when we had finished the last bottle of wine, I said goodbye to my friend at the door to the apartment block. I climbed the stairs back up to my place and got into bed, feeling frightened by what I had seen.
All right, thank you. I think because we're here to celebrate the translation into English, I wanted to start out in the land of translation. I think over the years, there have been more and more books being published from regions not just Latin America, but other regions and other languages into English. And even if there's more access to books from outside of the US, I think that process of translation is still a little mysterious to most readers. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about the process of having your work translated, maybe what that relationship is like between you, the writer, and the translator.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's definitely something that we have to celebrate because it allows us to see what happens in other parts of the world, in other cultures. I think one of the main virtues of literature is that it opens our minds to other cultures and ways of thinking, that it allows us to be in other people's skin and minds, and so it's possible only if some books are translated from very distant part of the world. So I feel mostly grateful to the translators who have worked with me. Sometimes it wasn't a very cool and easy relationship, especially because even though I don't speak or would never dare to write in English, I read it.
Right.
And I know when it doesn't say what I want it to say. So, and I'm not able to correct it. Mm-hmm. So it's very frustrating at times. But I think it depends on the translator. Rosalind Harvey is an excellent translator, but also we had the pandemic during the moment where she was translating, the pandemic came and she got really depressed, not sick but depressed, which was the other pandemic that was going on and it still is. So we had to change the date of publication, and we had a delay on that, and I was frustrated by that as well, and we couldn't work as fast as I wanted it to be. So it's strange because there's someone else rewriting your book in their own language, and they're doing a great job. They're doing a favor to you, which is awesome. But at the same time, it's like you want them to also to have your pace, your rhythm, your like hurry and impatience and all of that. So yeah, it's really, really a strange situation. It's like having another avatar in another country or language.
The control is almost taken away from you, but you still want some control because it's your writing.
Certainly. And especially in the UK where Rosalind lives, it's like they said translators are very militant, you say? Or how do you say militante? About the importance of the translator, which I think it's great. But sometimes as an author you would like to change things, of the book in the middle of the process of translation, and they say, no, this is my job and I will translate from the book. You don't stand in the middle between the book and me. So
it's like a creative process for both people.
Definitely.
And I don't know, sometimes writers are, I don't know, they want that creative control, so that makes it challenging.
It's like giving birth, the labor is awful, it's painful, but by the end you're really, really happy with the result. Normally. So I'm happy with the result.
I mean, I think one of the challenges, I should say, I first read your book, the Spanish version, because I really like your work, and I didn't feel like waiting for this. It took me a long time to read it, because I can read in Spanish, but I need the dictionary to get through it, and then when this came out, I obviously read the English version, and so it's interesting to compare certain parts that don't directly translate, and I think a lot of the job the translator is doing is trying to not mimic, but represent the the cadence, the rhythm, just everything that you've done in the original language. But sometimes it fails in English because it's not the same in Spanish. And I think the title, for example, if people can see, or some of you have the Spanish version, La hija única is different than stillborn. This means the only child or the unique child, but that doesn't work in English. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to how you and Rosalind would handle those moments, because there are plenty of others in the text itself that you kind of have that conflict between the two languages. And how did you resolve that?
Yeah, the publisher didn't like the title in I mean, it doesn't work in English because La hija única, as you said before, it has two meanings in Spanish: the only child and also the unique child. But that it's not the same, like double meaning in. So we wanted something that made a double meaning and was connected to the story, especially to Inés. And so, yeah, normally stillborn is just one word, and it means when a child is born and he's dead or it's dead. So we tried to figure out how we could do that, and we decided to separate the word. So I think she suggested it, and I think it was a very good idea.
Yeah, I mean, at least you retain something that also has that double meaning, even if it's not exactly the same. Were there other moments where you felt like that same thing happened, or was it the title was kind of the main one that became the biggest challenge?
I think the title was the biggest challenge, but also there were other moments where, in Spanish and also in French and normally in Latin languages, you don't repeat words. So in Spanish, you're looking for different synonyms to never repeat a word unless you really want to repeat it in a page. But in English, I found out with this translation that publishers prefer to keep repeating the same word instead of looking for synonyms, because otherwise they feel it like stiff or false, like something. And I was like very, very surprised by that. I was like, okay, I chose like 10 different synonyms of toilet. What is she repeating? Toilet, And I was upset by that until the publisher told me, or the editor, which is the same person in my small publisher house in the UK, please don't misunderstand it as laziness, it's really the way it is translated in English. So,
Wow.
And I said, okay, that I understand,
Yeah.
But I needed some explanation sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm sure at times you also have to just blindly trust the translator.
Yeah.
Especially if it's, I don't know, a language you don't know. Maybe that's actually easier to have it translated to another language, because you can just sit back and...
But the good thing with Rosalind is I know she's very, very clever. She works and teaches translation, so she reflects a lot on how the translation should be done. And also, she's very elegant, which is something I really like in her. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm wondering if, before we turn to any questions about the book itself, do you want to maybe just give everyone, for those who haven't read it yet, maybe just a brief synopsis of what the book is about, just to ground them in...
Yeah, what I can tell is that I started writing this book after the experience of a good, very, very close friend of mine who had a very difficult experience during pregnancy and afterwards. So I thought that, yes, I don't want to spoil it, but at the same time, I don't know how many of you have read the book so far. No one? Okay, you have. Okay, so and that it was like a tragedy falling upon her head, and I didn't know how she was going to go through it. I was really, really preoccupied for her, and I saw her like transforming, she and her partner, transforming what we all could normally call a tragedy into something very, very, very full of light, very inspiring, and it was just the way they looked at it at some point and interpreted it at some point and handled it. So I was very inspired by this story, which is sometimes very painful, but it leads us to a very clear and light, full of light place.
Yeah.
So it was like that. So I asked her permission if she did agree that I did this book, and I was going to her. She said yes, please do. And I was going to her work, to her job, where she works in a gallery, several times in a month, and we took coffee together and we talked, and I was doing some interviews, like recording what she was telling to me, and I wanted to include her in the process of writing. That was something beautiful, because I thought that it was going to be good for her as well, a sort of therapy, and yeah, it worked like that. So it was difficult at some point, because I was too concerned by, I wanted to be very respectful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been with a fictional character. But with her, since I knew her so much and I loved her, and I wanted her to feel respected, and not that I was stealing or, doing some kind of extractivism with her life.
Yeah. Yeah, because you've written autobiographical work before, sort of The Body Where I Was Born, but I think this is
and also fiction.
Yeah, and also fiction. And so I think it's interesting that in this case, it's writing the story of someone else, but someone you know, so you are still connected to them.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that you interviewed her, or took a very sort of research oriented approach to telling her story and sort of respecting her own story. Did she read the final draft or early drafts, or what was her involvement during that?
The first draft. She read the first draft, and she said, "Oh, it's so boring. You should invent more. Please invent something else, like kill all of us if you want."
That must have been freeing, though, to know that you could veer in other directions if you needed to.
Yeah, but I didn't want, at some point, I wanted to pay an homage to what she went through, And also, I was very inspired by the French author called Emmanuel Carrère. I don't know if you've read anything of him. Please read a book called like Other People's Life, or something like that.
Okay.
Like, other people's life. It's a novel on. It's inspired on her family-in-law family, you say? The family of her wife, of his wife.
Oh, yeah, the in-laws, yeah.
Yeah, so, and it's about how his sister-in-law got cancer and how she went through it. But it's very, very beautiful and respectful as well. So I wanted to do something in the same way. And there's also a novel that inspired me a lot, which is Maïlise de Kerangal, Men the Living, which is another novel that I recommend. Both are translated into English and both are great. And the second one is more fiction, but the first one is non-fiction. So I wanted to do, like a mixture between the two genres. I wanted this story to be really non-fiction, like Alina's story, and also there's Doris and Nicolas, Laura's neighbor, and also the narrator is obviously not me.
Right.
So I wanted to do this mixture between a story which is clearly non-fiction and the frame which is
Yeah, so the story, it's narrated, I mean, you read the excerpt, it's narrated by Laura, and she is, she's, I don't know, in the first part, we follow her very closely, sort of what you read. It's sort of her perspective, her beliefs, just a very close first person. And then by part 2, it's still first person, but we sort of shift to her friend Alina, who's the one who's your friend's story kind of inspired Alina's character. But that perspective shifts a little more towards her, but Laura is still there. We get these details of Alina's story, and then just very little I. The pronoun I does not show up much, but then it'll pop in at the end. And so Laura is very much still there. And so I'm curious to hear about maybe just a little bit about Laura as the narrator, and then your decision to use the first person in this sort of unique way.
Okay, so I wouldn't never dare to use the first person to narrate my friend Amelia's, which is her real name, story, because even though I could imagine what she went through, it was like doing like sort of not cultural appropriation, but how would you say? Yeah, some kind of appropriation, you know. And even though she allowed me to do that, she would have allowed me to do that. I was feeling like fake doing that. I sort of tried at some point, and I decided not to use that. I wanted someone who could, at the same time, said what I was feeling and seeing, and my reflections on what she was going through, and also who was able to go away to another part, like the neighbor's life, and was able to shift between one story and the other. So that's how I came up with this idea. But also I didn't want Laura, or the narrator, to be me, you know.
Right.
I wanted to be someone else for once. and just imagine how it would be to be a very radical, child-free woman. And I was having fun doing that, you know. Sometimes the story was too painful, and I had the need to go to a more playful place, and the narrator allowed me to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I guess maybe we'll go into, you mentioned that she's the narrator, she's very sort of radical, kind of has, she's very firm in her decision to not have kids, any other political belief that might come up. She's very firm in that.
And she tries to convince everyone not to have children.
Yes.
She's against that.
Yeah, and I guess that's what was so interesting about that first person to me, is that, like, in the beginning, you get that perspective from her, but then it fades away a little bit. And I think, it was interesting to see how just she learns more about Alina's, just her whole situation, and then just learns to adapt and sort of be there for her friend in that way. But yeah, I think on the surface, the book is about motherhood. I think that's, the summary mentions that. And, but what I think is really unique about it is that it kind of gives us a more expansive way of viewing motherhood. It's not just the biological mother, but sort of these other mothers. And there's a point where Laura, she uses the term substitute mother, which I found very interesting, and so I'm curious to hear how you would define this idea of the substitute mother.
Yeah, I read a book by Sophie Louise. I think it's published by Verso Books.
I know that they publish great stuff, but I don't think I've read that one.
So and it's about like different possibilities of family and motherhood, you know, and it was very inspiring, because normally we think about mother as the person who gave us birth or adopted us. and we don't think about that. Many times it's not that person who raises children. It can be the grandmother or an aunt, or I don't know, a friend of our mother. And sometimes, as the people say, it takes a village to raise a child. So I would like to acknowledge all these people who just get together and stick together to raise someone, or So I think motherhood can be also an activity. You can be a stepmother, or for a while, for a whole life, for like 1 month or 2 months, or things like that, and even I don't know, 1 week. You can practice that. And also, I think that we have a lot of sacralization for blood ties, and that's something that we should question a little bit, because sometimes it's like a wall that we just raise and doesn't allow each other to connect. So I was thinking about that. I was asking myself a lot of questions in that book during the writing process, and I think those questions are in the book, and I just wanted the reader to answer for himself or herself, and find their own answers.
Yeah, no, I don't want to. There's always a fear of giving too much away when I'm asking questions or thinking of something from the book. So I'll try not to say too much, but I think just as a whole, the story, it does acknowledge sort of either anyone who, for medical reasons, can't have a child, or just these other ways that people are kind of seeking that out. Or in Laura's case,
there is the nanny, the
nanny, the neighbor Doris, who she is a mother, but is sort of whether or not she wants the help, like it's just having someone there to help with her kid it's an additional support system that we see enacted in this novel. It was very interesting to see as sort of the focus of the book. I don't think there's much literature out there that really sort of names what you're naming here with this substitute mother idea.
And there's also, like in mammals normally, when they're not in captivity, when they're free out there in the world, like big cats, or also wolves, or dolphins, or I don't know, whales as well, or elephants in particular, raise the children or their cubes in groups, like in a collective way. And we used to do that as well before the industrialization started, and we came into the big cities. So we were here, we were there, raising, not only female, but also males participating in that, like the wolves do. And when we went into captivity, which is in the capitalist system or after industrialization, and we were in small apartments inside of huge cities instead of being in villages, we sort of renounced to that. And everything went into the shoulders of the mother, of the female part of the couple. And so that's something that I would like to remind, people, let's remind when we were free. and it's even more beautiful also for fathers and for uncles and for a lot of people who could enjoy also the pleasures of that. So that's in the book as well.
Yeah, it's a very much we see that move from a very individual perspective towards this more collective way of looking at it. And if you haven't read it, you'll see it when you're there. I'm actually glad you brought up animals, because this is something I've noticed in, I think, just about everything that you've written, is that you really focus on the natural world. I'm thinking about your short story collection, Natural Histories. Very much, I think every short story in there's some reference to an animal. Body Where I Was Born, God, when I'm remembering the mother calling the daughter a cockroach. Like there's always animals sort of appearing in your book, and birds that's easier to see up close, but they're there. And so I'm wondering if we could talk about in this book the pigeons that are nesting, and then just in general kind of why you're so drawn to the natural world and animals, sort of this those two worlds.
I love to observe them and to learn from, I think that we lost the consciousness of how animals we all are, and we tried not to think about that. But when we look at animals, like in documentaries such as Baby the Attenboroughs, which I love once, or others, we can sort of find a sort of mirror and acknowledge how much we are animals as well. So yeah, animals are like a reflection for the humans to find out who we really are, our true nature, and also our instincts and behaviors and ferocity and all that. And in this book in particular, they came in because I was writing, or while I was writing, there were a couple of pigeons outside our window in Mexico City. Even if you don't imagine there's animals there.
Pigeons are the most urban birds out there.
So they built a nest in our house, and I was trying to chase them, of course, because I don't like them to poo into my place. And also, but at some point we saw eggs there, and everyone not only in the house but around us was saying, please don't touch the eggs, don't kill them, let them let the babies yeah. So I said to myself, okay, I won't touch them, but they will enter into the book and I will observe it. And especially at some point one of the eggs fell down, and I saw that the mother, or the female pigeon, who was so concerned and trying to, and it was exactly what was going on in Alina's
her whole storyline. Yeah.
So like the egg, just being broken, and this. Also, I wanted to reflect what's going on when animals lose their cubs. Well, how do they behave? Is there grief on them? How do they go through it? So that's how they came into the story.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned grief as well, because that very much is in the book. And I don't know, I think there are moments where the women in this story, they hold such a sort of ethical weight about Alina's baby. Doris is the neighbor. She I think she's the one.
She's a widow.
Yeah, she's a widow, and I think is the one who said, yeah, sometimes I tell myself I'd be better off if I hadn't had him. It's awful, don't you think? Normal mothers don't think those kind of things. And so there is this sort of like dark thought that enters her mind, and then later on there's this sort of dark image of the mother dog, who I think it was a memory that Laura was having, where she remembered as a kid seeing this dog. She had given birth, and for whatever reason she ate her puppies.
Just one.
It was just one. Okay, it was sick. So there are these sort of like dark images, dark thoughts from the human mothers, and then also we get these memories and sort of very dark images of animals sort of doing something very similar. Also reminded me of Goya's painting Saturn eating his kids. That moment with the dogs was, I had to stop and just really think. It was very almost grotesque, but really fits with the story and sort of everything you do with the sort of animal and natural world in your work. So
Yeah, I
It's
was
powerful.
asking myself, what is a perfect mother? You know, what's a normal mother? The perfect mother, we know what it is because everyone tells us the perfect mother feeds well their cubs and is always ready to sacrifice herself for the sake of the children, and is also happy to be a mother all the time, 24 hours.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there is like an ideal, you know, like hanging over our heads, telling us you're not good enough. Whatever you do as a mother will never compare to the ideal of the mother. So, and I wanted to talk about that as well because this character Doris is not having a good time at all dealing with her boy, because she's depressed. She's so depressed that she can handle even with her own life. So how can she take care of someone else? And that's when Laura, who decided never to have children, sort of have a little bit glimpse of experience of how it is to be a mother for one day, maybe, or 2 days. So that's she can say.
Yeah, there's like a gradual softening that we see with Laura as she gets to know her neighbor's son.
And get in love not with children, not with the idea of having children, not with the idea of being a mother at all, but just with this one boy, you know?
Yeah, exactly, which I think is important to what you're trying to do with the book. Of Laura, she has made up her mind. Alina has made up her mind. They've made these different choices, but there are still ways they can be involved with each other's lives or the other, a neighbor's child. I just want to say we are going to be doing an audience Q&A soon. So if you have questions, if you need to give yourself a little pep talk to ask the question, now's the time to start doing that. And I'm trying to think what I want to do is the last one, maybe 2 questions for you. Actually, I know which one. So we talked about sort of the natural world animals that you have in your stories. You also write a lot about sort of the body and sort of a very like physical lived experience of being in a body, not just in this book, but all of your other books, I think, engage with that. And so I'm curious to hear how you were able to kind of continue that with this book and still have it very much related to this sort of subject of motherhood, the substitute mother, and sort of those parenting support systems.
So yeah, it's because I think that what makes us human really it's the fact that we have a body. Otherwise, we would be something like a ghost or something, an entity, you know, like ethereal or a spirit or something.
Which could be fun eventually.
Yeah. It will be one day probably, but the human experience is, you know, through the body. So everything that we experience, all the emotions, even the thoughts, are reflected into the body. So I always want my writing to go back to that, you know, like, because we can also relate to each other with that, even though if we belong to a very different culture and mentality and whatever, we can relate to my hand is aching, you know, my feet are aching, or I feel tickling, or things like that. So, and especially motherhood is a body experience as well, because you have the child in your womb first thing, and then because you have to give birth to the baby, and then you have to breast it. So it's a very, very physical experience, and I wanted to be clear about that in the writing. And also I think that the bodies are also like texts that we are writing all along the process of our life. So the scars, for instance, that we have in our bodies are like inscriptions of an event that marked us. Even some diseases as well that we can recall, oh, it started when this and this was happening in my life, and things like that. So, you know, the people who suddenly have all the hair white because something happened to them. So it's always like our experience in this world reflecting in our bodies, and that's important for me. So that's why I always come back to that.
I was going to ask another question, but maybe I'll hold it. Let's go to Q&A, and if we have no questions from you all, I've got plenty of others, but I want to hear from you all.
Don't be shy. It's
Start
okay.
over here. So, in the process of reading your translation, either when it's finished or throughout that process, are there times where you view your work differently? You're like, oh, I had never thought of it this way. You know, this translation makes me think about this event a little bit differently, or this dynamic a little bit differently.
Yeah, for sure. At some point, the translator sometimes said, but you said in the beginning that she doesn't like, I don't know, eggs. And now she's eating eggs or things like that. So, and also the time, the record of time, sometimes the translation makes me be aware of contradictions and things like that. And then I go and change the original version thanks to the translation. So for me it's always like a living or organic process. It's not something that it's finished and it will always remain like that. Fortunately, it's not written in stone, as we say, but also it can be reprinted and I go on working a little bit on the future reprints.
¿Tú elegiste con quién traducir el libro o fue la editorial la que eligió a traducir?
Okay, she's asking if I decided to work with this translator or if the publisher decided that. In that case, I suggested her.
But prior books, was it selected for you with your other novels? Or did you have choice then too?
Okay, not the body where I was born and not natural histories. It was a translator that I didn't know at all, and also not Jill Levine. But Rosalind and also Sophie Hughes, who has translated some of my short stories, I did chosen.
Anyone else? Are you working in a new book?
I just finished one. It's a collection of short stories, which is coming out in Spanish this autumn. In September, it's called Los Divagantes. I don't know if it's going to be translated with the same title, which would be The Wanderers.
Yeah, I was so I saw that you had that book coming out, and I could not figure out what that word meant because it wasn't even in the dictionary, at least the word reference app that I use when there's a word I don't know. So wait, what does it mean again?
The Wanderers.
Okay. Yeah, it's a cool cover too. Same publisher who did this one.
It's because of the albatross. There is a short story who tells the story of the albatross, and the albatross are, birds that have very, very precise paths in the sky, and also they are born in a place. They go almost around the world, and then they make huge distances because they can fly without doing this, just playing, and they always sort of come back to the exact place where they were born. And some of them get lost in the skies. We don't know why. And they never come back. They never have the life that was expected for an albatross. But very different lives. And they're called the Wanderer albatross. So that's why the title, because all the characters are sort of wanderer albatross.
Okay. Any other questions? If not, I do have a follow-up to that, but I want people to speak, so.
I kind of hate to ask yet another sort of translation-y question, but the book that I've read is Natural Histories, and it has a very different title
Yeah.
than the Spanish title, so I'm curious specifically about that and whatever else that brings to mind.
Okay, so that title was my first title in Spanish as well. Historias Naturales. But the publisher didn't like the title, and especially because there were a couple of other books called like that. I think Plinius and Primo Levi, I guess. So he said, no, please don't use that title, choose another one. And I decided to use the first short story title. So that's why. But the English publisher loved that title, so and especially in English, I think it works very well because normally it's natural history, not natural history.
I haven't read the book yet, but I follow your work, and I just want to thank you for the way you say it, to be a madre, something you used before for this book. I helped one of my friends with raising her baby, and I feel so lucky because I decided not to be a mother, but having the opportunity to help with this baby is beautiful,
Yeah.
I don't know. So
it is.
I'm happy with my decision, but I'm also really happy that I had the opportunity to help with this baby, which is amazing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that everyone should have the same privilege, you know, in the way they can handle it. Right. Because sometimes you could, just be there for a child for 1 month, and it doesn't mean that you have to decide to consecrate all your life to that. Just and also that works for women and men as well.
Yeah. Car, how are we on time?
Maybe one more question.
Okay.
I have a question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Particularly with the subject of motherhood and different kinds of motherhood. I know that places, particularly like Latin America, perhaps are not as progressive as other places in the world. So have you received any pushback on this book and this story, or has it mostly been this kind of, thanks and support that we all share here for sharing stories like this that perhaps are not quite as told?
What do you mean by a pushback? I don't understand that.
Resistance.
Okay, like someone saying I hated it.
Yeah.
It happened, like in a book club, book club in Yucatan. It was online, and everybody was saying, why did you write us as such a, they were outraged because they don't, they're more conservative apparently. This would never happen in San Francisco. I'm sure. But in some societies, as this part of Yucatan, they were really shocked by women saying such things. It was too much for them. Yeah, definitely it can be that, and also, but a risk that was worth it.
It's important work, and we thank you for telling those stories, because especially in Latin America, they're not often very told.
No, the people, they react badly when they still react badly when women say, I don't want to have children. They immediately consider you as a selfish person, and there's something wrong with her, probably. There's a trauma or something that she doesn't want to say. You're not allowed just to say it's my choice, and I'm a normal person. There's no normal person, that doesn't exist, but it's but I'm not a monster or any devil or kind of demon because of that. Just don't want to.
Right.
And
Don't
even-
feel like. And many women have to, even if they don't want, they have to be mothers because of the social pressure.
Absolutely.
It happens also in Italy, and also this, for the first time, this generation, like if my age and a little bit younger than my age, are saying, no, we don't. Maybe it's not even that we don't want to be mothers, but we don't find, the right society for us to be. It would be prison, it would be a sacrifice that I don't want to do. And if the society was different, certainly I would try it, but not in these conditions of almost poverty and with no social help at all, So for some places like Italy and maybe some parts of Latin America, it's a difficult and edgy subject.
I'm from La Ciudad de Mexico, and sometimes my own family they say like, you will never be a complete woman if you don't have any kids, and like that's not true.
No,
it's
not.
It's really hard for them to understand, but it's a choice, and I feel completely like, I don't know, it's hard, to make them believe that you really don't want.
Yeah, for sure. And also abortion in Mexico is also like, but here as well, I know in the States, it's also a very difficult subject, and sometimes it goes, you can't avoid to think about what would have happened if she was, like supported to do that,
Right.
how her life would have been in that case and things like that. So, and also euthanasia.
Oh yeah, euthanasia.
Euthanasia.
Oh yeah.
Euthanasia as well. Is it, possible, not possible? Is it worth it or not? How could it be? And those subjects are raised in the novel. There are no answers, I have to say. Don't wait for any, don't expect any answer because there's none.
Right.
But only questions.
That's part of why it's a successful novel, I think, is that it raises those questions and leaves us to kind of search more and question. So I appreciated that.
Thank you.
I think we're at time, so let's give another round of applause for Guadalupe.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you both so much. Thank you both. Let's give one more hand for Guadalupe. Thank you both so much. Katie, thank you for coming forward and,
Of course.
providing those questions for us. And Guadalupe, thank you for taking time out of your holiday to come. Thank you, we so appreciate it. And thank you all of you. Thank you. Oh my gosh, of course. Thank you all of you for joining us. We have copies of Stillborn and a couple of other titles of Guadalupe at the front. You can find them there. And I think I'm going to have you can be wherever you want to sign copies. So make sure you're comfortable. And you might find something in between here and there. And if you have any questions, let me know. If not, I will see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.